and welcome again. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. I mean, I think it's clear that this issue is not, housing affordability is an issue in San Antonio and nationally, internationally. And so I'm really looking forward to diving into this topic with y'all. So we've got 4 people joining me on the stage who have graciously agreed to share their time and expertise with us. You may know Ron Nirenberg as your mayor of San Antonio. Serving as councilman. Before that, was representing District 8 on the dais for 8 years. Sorry. 8 years total on the dais. And Nikki Johnson. Some of y'all probably know her from the Housing Commission. Appointed in 2020 and is a chair of the Renters Solutions Subcommittee, and she's very busy on that commission. She serves on a number of other subcommittees and working groups. And Michael Reyes is the acting president and CEO of the Opportunity Home San Antonio. A former resident of the Alazan Apache Courts, Michael holds more than 24 years of international, national, and local experience. 24 years. Nice. And Dr. Christine Drennan is an associate professor of sociology and anthropology at Trinity University, with expertise in urban geography, community development, and she recently served as interim executive director of affordable housing developer Alamo Community Group. Whew. Y'all, I don't think we're going to solve housing affordability tonight, but I really think that this conversation can help us all understand a little bit more why this issue matters to all San Antonians, whether they can afford their housing currently or not. It just seems to me that there's a bit of a disconnect in the community among the housed, the tenuously housed, and the unhoused. And so some of my questions are going to be targeted to each of you, but I really want this to be a dialogue, so if you have something you want to jump in and say, just give me a high sign and we'll pass the mic. I won't be muting your mics, unless I have to. But keep in mind that we have a really big subject to cover tonight, so we'll try and keep things moving along. I mean, I think that opening video said a lot about how we got here. You know, we have overflowing homeless shelters. You know, tens of thousands of households are on the wait list for public housing. Meanwhile, there's new apartment complexes that have landlords offering discounts and amenities to fill them. There's also vacancies in the mixed income areas that Opportunity Home oversees. So what's going on here? That video answered a little bit of those questions, but Christine, if you want to kind of add anything to how we ended up in this moment in housing.
How we ended up, and thanks, Iris. How we ended up here is quite old.
Mm-hmm.
The roots of this go back to the beginnings of the 20th century, if not even earlier, as the city was forming, and even before air conditioning, when the city really came up. And interestingly, every city in the United States went through some of the same phases, but we did it a little bit differently, in all honesty. The timing was a little bit different. As our city was growing, it has always been a much more ethnically diverse city than so many cities in the early 20th century. And because of that, really because of that, in an American racist past, housing was being built with deep restrictions that said some folks could live in some neighborhoods and some in others. That's followed by the United States government kind of sanctioning that and institutionalizing that with redlining, and so many of us have now seen the redlining maps. San Antonio had, I think, I haven't done the measurements, but I believe a larger percentage of the city was redlined than in a lot of other cities, which meant that entire neighborhoods, entire swaths of the city were divested as that money was guided into other areas. And we lived that, we see that these days. And that's followed, that's followed by some of the things that are described in this. And there was a lot of missed opportunities when the city itself probably could have stepped in and reversed some of those patterns. But the really interesting question to me, and I'm gonna like hijack this immediately.
I have an immediate follow-up question for you.
The interesting question to me is like, I tell that story. I've been telling that story for a long time, and I thank you for the willingness to, and to enter into these dialogues as far as these conversations, and Pat taking it and doing really interesting things with this, so that we're all educating ourselves on where we've been and why we're here. But so much of it's really old, right? This is 100 years old. And now we can look at it and go, well, it was 100 years ago. And for a lot of us, we're pretty middle class, pretty comfortable, right? So why should I care? And it's an ethical question. It is absolutely an ethical question. But in all honesty, that only gets us so far. Right? So my heart might go out. But I think we need to think a lot more deeply about why we should care. In order to do that, again, hijacking just a little bit, I have to tell you about my day. I had a 5:30 flight to get to, because I'm really wanting to be here. 5:30 a.m. flight, right? That meant booking an Uber the night before, fine, it shows up, right? My Uber shows up on time, I get to the airport at 4:45. I make the flight at 5:30. Airport's bustling. TSA is everywhere. They're making coffee, the flight attendants, everybody is there and they're at work. And I get on a plane and I get home. Another Uber takes me home. And I pay my house sitter and I pay my pet sitter, and then I'm hungry, I go to the HB, and then I come over here. And just a pretty regular day. But if one point in that day hadn't worked, I wouldn't be here. The day would have been completely different. If one TSA worker hadn't shown up, right? If one flight attendant hadn't shown up, I wouldn't be sitting here. And not that I'm a big deal, but it's every single one of us. Every single one of us, our lives are so deeply interconnected and dependent on others. And that everybody kind of does their job and does it well, right? So I'm a teacher, but the TSA folks, they're the TSA folks, right? And hopefully I teach their students, but they take care of my security on 9/11, right? And if one of those folks isn't well housed, and isn't well fed, and isn't clothed, and their kids aren't going to school, then they're not going to do a good job. And that's going to impact every single person that they touch that day, which is thousands of people. And that's why we need to care. It's ethical, but it's also economic. Right? This whole system, where we're so interdependent on one another, it falls apart if somebody is not well housed or well clothed or well fed. And I think that's why we need to care. So yeah, the harm was done generations ago. We still live with it today, and it still impacts us, even if you have a house, even if you have two. It impacts you. So, and more than just like, whoa, I really care deeply and I should give to this organization. We all need to think about how dependent we are on one another just to get through the day. And so everybody needs to be secure. I hijacked.
Thanks. No, but I mean, you're making the case that it's not just hearts and minds, it's wallets, it's economy, it's so much more than that. And I would open it up for other panelists. Like, why is this a bigger problem than just for people who can't find housing in this moment?
Well, I would just add to that, and that was the maybe reckoning point for a lot of cities in America. I would say we got started on this issue before many cities did. But the reason why the pandemic was a reckoning is that people started to realize we're, quote unquote, all in this together, and just how dependent we are literally on our lives, safety, and health on one another. I think from an economic standpoint, we also have to recognize that having a safe affordable roof over your head is the foundation for a family's economic security, and therefore for a community, for a city, for a state, for a country, it is the foundation of our nation's economic security. So affordable housing becomes not only just the family's ability to make all the other things work, but it's also how we start to build up a foundation. And when you think about the real impacts of the pandemic from an economic standpoint, were really everything shook to the ground. It was a reckoning for this entire country. The fallout economically from this pandemic are things that we're still facing. We have an opportunity, and I think we are seizing the opportunity to rebuild that foundation. We often talk about the clarity of the moment being that we finally saw just how uneven and broken we've built this foundation, where in a city like San Antonio we could have massive economic development, 3% unemployment, some of the boom times in economic diversification that we've enjoyed and has become, part and parcel of being a top 10 city, where we also have the nation's largest proportion of urban poverty. How does that happen at the same time? Something is not working in terms of the foundational level of building our economy, and that's what we're trying to address.
So, good evening. One of the things the pandemic did that I can say I appreciate is it showed everyone how at the drop of a dime, you could all be in a situation that you may have judged someone else for being in the day before. You're driving to work and you see someone outside with a sign saying, do you have money? I'm hungry. God bless you. Can I get some change? Pandemic happens and everyone is in the same situation, right? So now you're no longer quite judging because you did it. It was just, you missed a couple of hours at work. Now your paycheck is a little short. Now you're trying to figure out how you're going to pay your bills. And these are situations that those of us who work in this arena, we see this all the time. So what I hope, one of the things that we take away from this conversation today is, it's not them. It's not them that need affordable housing. It's us. Christine said it so beautifully. When one part of our fabric is ripped, it's going to tear for everybody. Because if there is someone, a TSA worker, that's there and she's there, but she's concerned, how are my children, because I left them at home with no lights on, I left them at home with very little food to eat, or she's stressed about how she's going to pay the rent in the next coming week, she's not going to do a great job. She's going to give you a bad attitude, right? And eventually that's going to fall on the taxpayers if she has to go for resources. So let's walk away with the understanding that it's not them, it's our problem. And what can we do to solve our problem?
On that note, I just wanted to kind of put on my United Nations former World Bank hat on and just kind of look at it from an international perspective. There's $17 trillion that are needed to house folks around the world that are unhoused. We need 300 million houses right around the world. So how does that impact San Antonio? So I'd like to put that number. I haven't heard anyone say it, but typically the World Bank, we say an average person in developing countries needs $2.15 a day to survive. And if we tie it to San Antonio, the average San Antonian, based on the median income, that's $125 a day. Think about that. $125 the average San Antonian has a day to eat, clothe, buy medicine, and everything else they need. And an opportunity home, our average family survives on $30 a day. So it's an interesting way of looking at it. And so I know we can talk a lot about the past, and I'd like for us to talk about the future, right? Because we know the past, what are the solutions moving forward? And the great thing is we have a great roadmap ahead of us, right? It's a strategic housing implementation plan. It's a great way to move forward. We have our partners aligned. We have a roadmap forward. But I think, from my perspective, I think it needs to be tied to a vision. What does that vision look like? And I think if we look down the road, right, what does that outcome look like? What does the future San Antonio look like? And can you just imagine for a second an inclusive, sustainable city with various modes of transportation and an urban core that is not racially divided or economically divided? Can you imagine that future? And I think we're on the way there, and I'm very confident we'll get there.
Yeah.
Well, and you mentioned the strategic housing implementation plan. That's SHIP. I think we all know the SHIP in this room, but the city's housing goals, they have that dashboard of progress, right, towards those goals. Significant progress towards building homes for folks who make closer to the area median income. Not so much towards those that require deeper affordability. Those are severely lagging behind. And so Christine and Nikki serves on the Housing Commission's Removing Barriers Committee. I told you she was very busy. So what are some of the barriers that local, this is also for everyone, but I'd like for y'all to start, some of the barriers that local government, like agencies, nonprofits, and developers face when trying to build those, we're trying to build deeper affordability for people.
So I'll start kind of from the more institutional perspective, is that no matter what you're building, right, housing, especially an apartment complex, it costs the same. It just about costs the same. Sure, if it's real upscale, it may be slightly more, but fundamentally, it's just about the same. And so where's the affordability come in, right? Labor should be paid what labor should be paid more than it is. And some raw materials we should be paying more for than we actually do, I think. So where's the affordability come in? And it comes in the financing. And the financing, a lot of that is not under our control. We're trying desperately through the bond program to subsidize that, but it's not enough. And we know that. We made a good first step. But this is the state, and it's the federal government. And ironically, these days, we are paying for more subsidized housing through the Internal Revenue Service than we ever did through housing and urban development. Right? That's where we're getting the money these days. And that we need, those are federal level programs. But hopefully with the changes in administration that could be coming, maybe we'll start to think much more deeply about that. Is this the way that we really want to subsidize affordable housing, is through the tax code, rather than possibly through some other tools and techniques that might be available or that we can invent. Right? It's not that we discover them. So it's really, it's a financing question. But there's all of these tiers. There is the local, which is really the smallest, and then there's the state, and then there's the federal. And there's some people in this room that are brilliant at this and know it. But there's some really fundamental questions that we have to ask also at the highest level about how we're actually funding and subsidizing housing. And now it's through the tax code rather than through any kind of actual hardcore subsidy.
I mean, she answered the question. She answered the question. I'll just briefly say, I know the mayor's about to say something. Funding, of course. I would just add to that NIMBYism. For those that don't know, it's not in my backyard. I don't want that in my neighborhood. Why are you building that here? And probably some zoning.
I'm glad we're going to talk about zoning. No, I just say a couple of things too. You do have headwinds. I mean, this is a documentary that clearly outlines there are forces at play that are taking stock out of our affordable housing space that really are not serving its purpose to actually put people in homes, that are creating cost pressures. There's a supply issue. The supply of housing at all levels of affordability is something we need to watch, because even if we don't have affordable housing at market rate, it starts to create downward pressure on all the other levels of affordability. So, what we have to do is recognize the fact that, first of all, the deeply affordable housing, 50% of AMI or below, is going to require some very heavy subsidy. It's going to use the bulk of our financial resources to accomplish it. What I continue to tell people is that we are never going to solve the affordable housing crisis if we're only trying to build our way out of it. We also have to look at wages. We have to give people pathways to education and training so they can earn more money. And that is why, and I'm just going to give you a quick plug, we can talk for 2 hours about Ready to Work and the importance of it. That is people's last option of getting on a pathway to a job that will be paying better than a poverty wage. And if you do that, the children in that house and the grandchildren from that children's family will be on their own pathway of economic mobility, and therefore not requiring subsidized housing further as generations go on. So it is transformative if we can get people on pathways to careers that don't pay poverty wages. But on the housing side, we are facing pressures financially, we're facing pressures politically. I'll give you an example. Next week, if anybody wants to come to council, you'll see this on the dais. We've got an affordable housing project that's already been given 9% housing credits at the state, $20 million of public subsidy that's already been approved for this development to provide deeply affordable housing, affordable housing at 60% or below. And it's got political opposition because people have a misperception of affordable housing and a negative stigma of the people that are served by housing that simply means you can afford to live there. And so we need to take advantage of the opportunities that come to us with regard to financial resources, and this is a great example of it. If anybody's interested, it's in District 10, where we have a huge need for affordable housing. But we also have to remove the stigma of affordable housing and have some political fortitude. I think there are ways you can do that that are good and appropriate. There are also ways you shouldn't do that. A one-size-fits-all to the entire country to solve this problem is probably not the way we can address this. But you know, I did want to open with one thing, and I just wanted to compliment the essay report, and in particular you, Iris. We're now putting money into a public education campaign about what affordable housing is, so we can help remove some of that stigma and build some community support because we're all in this together. You know, there are very few people in the editorial space that understand it, that take the time to understand it, that dig deep into the issues and the nuance. Iris has been doing that for years. You can't replace that experience, so I'm glad did Angie already leave? Anyways, Angie's here. Iris is really doing more than just reporting on the story. She's also creating civic awareness, which is desperately needed for us to solve this problem.
Just to echo and ditto, Iris is amazing, and we're so glad she's part of this community. But to just add to what the mayor is right, is removing the stigma of affordable housing. I want to share something with you that we don't often talk about. I'm not sure if you've ever heard this, and I'm going to reveal the big secret. Public housing is mixed income housing. Have you heard that before? The data that we have, even at the oldest public housing communities, like Alexander Patrick, we have a percentage that are 60% AMI, 80% AMI, and even market rate. And why is that? Various reasons, right? We have folks who, either there's a family member, usually a child, who turns 16, gets a job, brings income to the household, or it could be the head of household gets an education, gets a better job, brings revenue. We should celebrate that. Right, that's a good thing, right? And I think we've somehow moved in the narrative in this city where mixed income housing is a bad thing, and we need to be reminded what it actually is, and public housing is mixed income housing. So, there I said it.
Yeah, along those lines, Nikki and Michael, we all are both part of the Reframing Housing Advocates cohort, right, hosted by the San Antonio Area Foundation. Can you kind of dig in a little bit to, like, why do we need this reframe? I mean, we talked a little bit about it, the NIMBY, all of those, like, kind of negative attitudes, but what will y'all be, like, working, what does the new frame look like?
You want me to start? So I'm under pressure because my fellow classmates are standing before me, Mark, and Jane, and everything. I think the first thing I'm glad, I think we all agree that the essay report, in the title of this event, you put looming crisis. We talked about that. It's not a crisis yet. This is an affordable city. We want to avoid a crisis, right? There are crises happening. I think we diminish the issue because there's a climate crisis, there's an economic crisis, there's a everything else crisis, right? So we don't want to diminish the issue. It's a really powerful issue, but we're not quite there yet. And I know we hear the jargon of gentrification, We're not there yet. We will be there. And Chuck told me to share personal stories to make this interesting and not data-driven, which is another reframing issue that we don't want to, just be driven by data, because no one cares about data really, because you want to hear the stories. Quick story. When I was 24, moved on to DC, lived on Capitol Hill. I was renting a house that I could afford with 4 other roommates. I had to have 4 roommates. I think we were paying $3,000. This was back 24 years ago. The neighbors on either side were $1 million houses, but that was the only thing we could afford. I had vegetation growing out of my floor. I'm not sure if it was a fern or a tree, but it was growing out of my floor, but that's what I could afford. But I was living in what otherwise was an African-American neighborhood that were driven out by the wealthy. And so I got to see gentrification head on. We're not experiencing that just yet. But the reframing discussion is really interesting because, back to what the mayor said, how do you debunk decades of stigma? When you hear the word Section 8, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? When you hear public housing, what's the first thing that comes to mind? When you hear those people, what's the first thing that comes to mind? We have a lot of work. I think we're months or maybe a year into this discussion. I have some great classmates, and including Nikki, so I'm going to Nikki if you want to add to that.
So one of the things we talk about a lot is changing, is educating people. A lot of people have the feelings that they have about affordable housing and the people who need it, those people who need it, because they've either heard something, it's what they think they look like, it's what they think it is statistically, and it's usually not right. And that's Nikki saying that. I'm not speaking for all of the reframing work group, because they're looking at me right now. I love y'all. And the education of it is so important. And I'm going to tell you why. You think it's those people, and it's the criminals, and it's those that don't like to work, and it's the lazy. It's your distant cousin who lost their job and can't pay their rent. It's your great aunt who's deciding if she's going to buy groceries, pay for medicine, or pay her rent or her mortgage. It's not who you think they are. They could be you. And when we can just grasp a hold to that and take away whoever thought of this stigmatized idea of who they are, I wish I could have a conversation with them, because they could be you at any given moment. Another reason why it's so important is because there's a lot of pushback. When there is great development happening, you have a lot of the NIMBYism, a lot of people that don't want it in their area. And if we don't educate, if we don't have these conversations, if we don't begin to reframe, how can we effectively make change in the city? How can we effectively help people have affordable places to live? Everyone doesn't want to have a home. Buy a house, I should say. Some people want to live in an apartment, and they should be able to do that. But they shouldn't have to fight the people that are living in homes that don't want them in their neighborhood. I don't know what I did. Thank you. So reframing and reshaping the way that we see this, the way that we see this problem, and I push back just a little bit lovingly, Michael, I see it as a crisis. If there is more than one person that is out on the street or trying to figure out if they're going to buy groceries or pay rent and live in their car, or whatever their decisions are, that's the crisis, in my opinion. And I think we need to take it seriously, but also look at it as a us thing and not a them.
Can I? I want to add to that. And actually, I want to push on the gentrification too. But
You don't know that.
the way that we communicate about this, and I've been paying a lot of attention to this recently, is the way that across all sectors, not just in housing, we often we do it through stories, which is probably one of the most profound ways to do it. But almost in a parallel sense is that, you'll see a story in the newspaper about a family whose child got sick, and so mom couldn't go to work, and so mom lost her job. But that's the story, right? And what I feel so strongly about these days is that we need to take that story the next step and say, well, mom works at the H-E-B. And now mom's not going to work, and yeah, mom's not making money for her own family, But now also HEB is short-staffed. And you and I are going to go to the HEB and then we will feel it. And then what we do in our own lives will somersault or like catapult into something else. We're all connected. And so if one of us is not well housed, all of us will feel it. Not just because our heart goes out, but we will feel it in all kinds of ways, right? TSA, security, all of those things. Bill.
I'll make it real quick.
Go ahead.
I want to say this real quick too. Also, it's a nurse. It's someone that's an LPN or an RN, and she works and makes great money, but she has loans she's also paying back, and she's raising children. It's a two-parent household. It's not always a single mom or a single dad. And these two-parent households are working a job each, full-time, and have side hustles. And they're still trying to figure out how to make the ends meet. So it's not just the poor single mom, and it's not just the person that's getting out. I promise you, we need to really reframe how we're thinking about affordable housing and who it's for. Not only is it for everyone, but it's for the person that you really don't think that it's for. Because, listen, we could all be, we probably didn't say this again tonight. We could all be one paycheck away from being the person that needs affordable housing.
That's the issue. So I'll push back on the idea that we have to call it a crisis, an emergency, or not any of the above. The reality is we are facing a crisis of housing insecurity. Too many people are that close to going over the edge, and that's what the pandemic taught us, is that, for overnight, we had a health event that became that moment for tens of thousands of San Antonians and millions of Americans. That's why our food bank line in 1 week went from 60,000 families to 120,000 families when we supposedly had 3.5% unemployment. The reality is, if you have no benefits to a job and you have a health emergency, you can lose the ability to pay rent. If you have children at home and you lose your babysitter, the ability to pay for your babysitter, you're all of a sudden you can't make it to work. You can't pay the rent. So we have a housing security crisis, and here's the reference point why I don't think it's useful for us to say whether it's a crisis or emergency and waste time on that aspect. The reality is, here in San Antonio, we have a crisis level of housing insecurity, but we also have a community that's committed and aligned, and a housing framework that we got started ahead of the pandemic, that we've been able to resource with all of the federal legislation that's come down as a result of this terrible event. And we, relative to our peer cities, are miles down the road in what it means to solve that issue and to deal with that crisis. So I want to give a little bit of encouragement in terms of what we're seeing play out in our communities is difficult, and we need to address it, and we should treat it as it is, which is it's a crisis of economic insecurity within the family. But we have tools and we have a roadmap. We have a plan. We don't have concepts of a plan, we have an actual plan.
Well, and just not to pick on you, Michael, but to push back a little, there is gentrification happening in San Antonio. It may not be though at the same level it is in DC or in other areas, but I think folks in various areas of the city have felt the pressures to sell their home that's worth more, especially in the east side. But parallel to that are concerns about displacement. That's like the ultimate negative result of gentrification. And I think we have an example. I'm going to reference the soap factory, of course, because we recently had news about that. But that's some of the last naturally occurring affordable housing in downtown. It's facing, for those of you who don't know, it's facing demolition and replacement with probably luxury housing and mixed use paired with a baseball stadium. And so clearly there is a market and demand for workplace housing in downtown San Antonio. where people who work in the tourism and service industry, where we heard from them the other night, they can walk to work, they don't have enough money for a car, that location is absolutely perfect for them. But for the mayor, and really all of you, is there any way to preserve or incentivize more affordable housing, specifically downtown?
Yeah, I think there is, and I think we are attempting to do it. The first thing is to recognize the most expensive place to build housing is going to be in the urban core. That's just a fact of the matter, which is why you're not seeing a lot of affordable housing development. And the housing that's naturally affordable are also market rates, subject to market rate forces. So in some cases where we're seeing the affordability is that people are putting themselves in a really, in sometimes substandard housing that needs to be developed. In the case of Soap Factory, it is a privately owned development that is going to be redeveloped. So knowing that, how can we involve ourselves as a community with the resources and policy framework that we do have to make sure that when folks are in those units, they have an opportunity to move and be protected from negative impacts. So in this case, we are working with the developer to provide relocation assistance. None of this will happen for at least for about a year. We are working with, thanks to Opportunity Home, for folks who are have lower income and would qualify for actual affordable housing, income restricted housing, getting them placed in a unit that would be suitable for them. So we're not going to be able to prevent redevelopment. We're just not. But when it occurs, we can also make sure that we have a displacement strategy, which is following the guidelines of the SHIP, making sure that it is people-focused so that we account for every family that's going to be impacted by redevelopment.
If there's one penny of public money in any form that goes to those new developments in the market sector, I think that we do have the power to step in. I've known you for a long time.
We don't agree on everything.
No. And this is like a 30-minute old one, but it's been stewing. As workforce, absolutely love it. Workforce, right? We live in a capitalist economy. There will always be low-wage jobs. There have to be low-wage jobs. That's the way it works. Should they be living wage? Absolutely. But then, even if they're living wage, they will be lower-wage jobs, right? That's a capitalist economy. That's how it goes. In which case, we cannot educate out of this crisis, right? And again, I use that term loosely. Even when everybody goes through workforce, we're still going to have some low-wage jobs. In which case, we're still going to need affordable housing. So the idea that we can educate ourselves out of it, I don't think that's necessary.
No, I think you have to do both, which is exactly why we're looking at this as both sides of the coin. But to suggest that an acceptable lower wage job has to continue to be paid $7.25 an hour with no benefits is simply unacceptable in 2024. So I'm not saying that that's what you're saying. I'm just saying that that's the challenge that we have. And we are going to have affordable housing. We have tools to provide for affordable housing. We have to have a mix of affordable housing. And if 20% of our community is dependent on subsidized housing, we have a problem. So what I'm suggesting is that we have recognized there's a supply problem at every level of income. We've got to use the tools that we have available to us to address it. So on the subsidized housing, at deeply affordable AMI, we're doing that. We've got to do more of it. But I'm also asserting that we're not going to be able to build our way out of it. There's simply not enough. Michael just, mentioned the amount of public funds that would be required just to address unsheltered homelessness. We've got a challenge on our hands, and so when it comes to what the private sector will do, and realize this, 90+% of the homes that would be built, multifamily or single family, are going to be built by the private sector. So we've got to work with private sector developers with the tools that we have to help impact the affordable housing supply challenge, as well as all the other areas of income AMI housing. I will also say that with regard to the soap factory units, we acknowledge there are public tools being used. We hope that the phase 1 development is going to be in place by contract before anything is realized, including the ballpark. But through this development, they're going to impact that supply challenge downtown. And through this development, we are requiring the relocation system. Through this development, we are requiring the anti-displacement strategy. If we weren't involved, none of those things would be required. So that is us leveraging the tools that we have, using the shift to guide our path as we work with private and public sector to address the supply challenge.
Well, and you mentioned opportunity homes supply challenge as well. You know, in 2023, the Housing Authority served about 2,300 fewer households with public housing and housing choice vouchers than it did in 2019. I mean, the agency is spending more money and housing fewer people while the wait list is growing. So how can the agency turn this tide? I know that there's a number of different avenues you can pursue, but how are you looking at flipping those numbers around?
Easy question, right? Well, two things. If we divide it in the biggest programs, public housing and the housing choice voucher, which is known as Section 8, we start with public housing. At this moment, this month, we are bleeding $1.5 million a month. We don't have the money for public housing. If you look at the White House cut public housing by 8%. A Democratic president cut 8%, right? Because there's bipartisan support for vouchers. So the tide, and I know Dr. Drennan has talked about this in terms of historical tide, at least in the last 30, 40 years, has gone toward vouchers. And so our job is to preserve the stock we have. We have to keep it, we have to maintain it. But how do we do that with declining funding? Our average rent of public housing, our lowest rent is $50. The average rent is $200. How are we going to pay salaries, resident services, wraparound services, keep the lights on with that kind of revenue coming in? So it's a huge challenge before us. It's a challenge that all the other 3,000 housing authorities around the country are experiencing. Now we move over to the housing choice voucher. We spend about $104 million a year to provide vouchers for about 11,000 households. This year we're projected to increase that by 12,000. Where's that money coming from? And the reason there's an increase because as rents increase in the city, our payment standards increase as well. Folks, based on our recent data, I think traditionally the housing choice voucher folks were in the urban core, but in the last 10 years we've seen that those folks move past 410 for the first time. They're now between 410 and I-10 and D8, D9. So we always traditionally think that housing choice vouchers are a D1, D2, or even D3 concern. It's now a D8, 9, and 10 concern. Because the vouchers are migrating, because that's where the jobs are, that's where the transportation, that's where the attractions are, right? So we've now fragmented this economy, which we knew all along, right? That was the case. And so now we're seeing the migration going down to Brooks in the southeast side a bit. So people, that's why it's called a housing choice voucher. Families decide and they have their choice on where they want to live. They don't want other people to tell them where they should live. And the data is very clear. They're migrating outside 410. And so as they migrate, those payment standards increase. So that's why we're seeing a $12 million increase this year, in addition to a $104 million budget. So where's that money coming from? So it's a very complicated issue. I'm very concerned about public housing. If we were not a moving to work agency, which is a fancy HUD designation name to mean that we can move our monies around, public housing would be at the risk of bankruptcy at this point. And so because we're MTW and we're one of the first of 36 around the country who had the designation, we can move some voucher money to keep public housing alive. And so it's a very complicated issue. We probably need 5 hours to talk about it at least, but that's just kind of the quick synopsis.
Well, and you mentioned that folks are moving to where the jobs and the trains are. With transit-oriented development, which is kind of layering those things and aligning them with transit, is that possibly, if affordable housing downtown is too expensive, could that potentially be an alternative as to like, okay, well, if we can't build affordable housing downtown, we need to build affordable housing where it's connected to transit, so people can get around who can't afford a vehicle. That's a question. Is that seen as like a viable solution for you? Yeah, I think we'll start with you.
Yeah, well, that's the interesting thing about, I don't know what we call it, the last master plan, right?
As a tomorrow.
Yeah, that looked at regional centers. We're not a Chicago, right? Where you've got the loop and all the economic activity, or like a huge percentage of the economic activity is right in this incredibly concentrated place. As a southern city, that's not how we grew up. So we do have these different centers of economic activity that have a real continuum of kinds of jobs. The medical center is the best example of that. So if we used our policy tools, right, to direct, affordable housing, public housing is the ideal. But even the subsidized housing that uses tax credits and things into those areas, and we do have kind of the levers to be able to direct those funds into those places. Yet it's a better solution. I mean, it is a solution. The best solution is still, in my mind, is the public housing model, not the public housing perception that we carry, but the model of how it's financed. But a really serious and deep conversation about using the tools that we have to direct those kinds of subsidized housing into very, very particular places, rather than kind of get bossed around by the state, which happens a lot. About you can do stuff here and not there. I think I would love to see those conversations in place.
Well, under transit-oriented development, that requires a robust and reliable transit system as well. And I think Nikki has pretty good, has some perspective on this. As I understand, a lot of these services don't reach where you live on the far west side. Did you kind of tell, Christine shared with us a little bit about her day and her travel. Tell us a little bit about yours.
Would you like to know?
Yeah.
I got here by taxi.
Mm-hmm.
I got here by taxi. There are not a lot of taxi services in the city that have a ramp that I can get this wheelchair into. As a matter of fact, with this particular company, I believe there is 2, and only 2 drivers trained to do the required buckling of the chair and all of those safety things. If those 2 men are not working that day, if one of them is off of work and the other one is picking someone up that doesn't need a chair, guess who doesn't have a ride? There is no Via Link where I live. The nearest place for me to catch a bus is, I want to say 5, I think it's a total of 5 miles down Highway 90. When I say Highway 90, I mean Highway 90. There is no way for me to safely ride the highway. There is no bike lane, no shoulder area, nothing safe for me to ride in to get to that, the Via pickup. I can't think of the name, I don't know why. Thank you very much, Via Trains. So when I need to go somewhere, if it's to a doctor's appointment, I take medical transportation. If I want to go to church, my pastor's over there. If I want to go anywhere else, I'm catching rides and have to take my manual wheelchair. So the Via Trans is not available in every area. Neither is the Via Link. Frustrating for me and many other people is that's what the Via Link service was formed for, to get you to the nearest place where you could catch a Via and to catch a transfer, but it's not available. And I'll share with you the reason that I was given, because they do have a line that you could call if you want to request that you have service in your area. I was told that Via Link is a service to get people to work faster. If they were to add a route in my area, that would slow down the route. The frustration with that, I was getting phone calls and emails because I am a commissioner asking, why are they building affordable houses, but there's no transportation? And because this is not the only area that there is no available transportation. So people wanted to come and move into this apartment complex. It's affordable housing. It goes by income. They were newly built, so there was a lot of vacancy. But if they didn't have a car, they couldn't move in. So the need for the availability of the affordable housing and available transportation as a partnership, in my opinion, is very, very important.
Just to echo what Nikki said, you know, transportation costs are not often associated with housing costs, and they're linked. We have a workforce that is working outside of the city, outside of Bexar County, because it's affordable, and they have to. We're not calculating those transportation costs to come into work. So that's something that obviously we're looking into. On the Housing Commission, I know that transit-oriented development is being led by Pete Alamise with the Housing Trust. There's a subgroup, and it's something on the forefront of the Housing Commission, something we're really considering. I'm not considering something we're leading on and seeing how we're going to consider this in future projects. Just quickly on Todd, it's a huge opportunity, especially with Opportunity Home and the future Green Line, Silver Line. We have developments along those pathways. There's an immense opportunity here to reimagine those communities, to make sure that they remain affordable and to expand the number of units along those pathways. We also forget about we're part of a larger regional economy here, and with the Valley, with Austin, with future rail transit. What do those opportunities look like in terms of future transit, future housing, and how can we interlink that? I think we often think of San Antonio, you know, as kind of, you know, by itself, but it's really part of a regional $4 trillion economy, and so, you know, there's great potential here.
And I just say, because Dr. Brennan mentioned SA Tomorrow, this is all iterative. SA Tomorrow was a tripartite plan. It was multimodal transportation, land use and planning, and sustainability. And so we have the opportunity now, because you rightly point out, you can't do transit-oriented development if you don't actually have transit. So we're finally introducing transit to the city, which was part of the multimodal strategy. All of these things are coming together to form this tripod, this stool, for us to address the issue of economic insecurity, of poverty in the city. And you've got to do it all. You can't just do one, you can't do two, you've got to do them all. You've got to make sure that people are mobile. You've got to make sure that they have a safe, affordable roof over their head. And they also have to make sure that they are able to be in the workforce with a non-poverty wage. If you have all those things and you're working towards those things, you will address poverty. We are finally doing that. I would just tell you, though, that it's very challenging to undo the things of the past. You know, the hardest challenge to introduce transit in the city was to actually have reasonable conversations with the most pro-transit people. We want light rail in this community. I do. But there's no way we could reach Nikki or anybody else in this community that actually is dependent on transit if that's what we were building. So we opted for ART, Advanced Rapid Transit, which is essentially light rail on wheels, so we could extend it to take advantage of transit-oriented development, which to me, using the words of Dr. Juan Valdez over there, is democratizing access to affordable housing, to workforce, to recreation, to all the things that you need to thrive in a community.
Right. Economic models say that as you increase accessibility to any place, the price is going to go up per unit for land. So yay, all of this, but we have to watch out, right? We can't just let the market just take over. As we increase accessibility, green lines, silver lines, gold lines, all of that, we still have to maintain an eye on it, and we still have to keep it, we're still going to have to kind of control it, because the prices are automatically going to go up.
Can I just follow on that? I agree.
This isn't a debate, I swear.
So I agree, which is that there is an important role in local, state, federal regulatory framework. This is where it's extremely challenging, where I'm going to tell you my advice if you're really interested in solving these challenges, to go vote in November. We are aligning all of our efforts here in San Antonio. We have a housing commission that was directed by the mayor's housing policy framework, which now is implemented by the SHIP. The housing commission is seated at the table, experts that align all of these areas. We've got VIA, we've got Opportunity Home, we've got residents in the area. We have the right folks at the table. We're aligned. We're making policy changes. We're calling bond elections. We're changing our city charter to do it. We're building mass transit. We're changing the way we're funding the city to redirect the very little sources of local revenue that we have to address all these three big things. What do we see going on in the state? Underfunding of our public education system, a complete dereliction of duty on our mental health system, a complete deferring to private sector forces for addressing the housing issue. At the federal level, I think the last 4 years, in my opinion, has been much better than the previous 4. We have better alignment there, but if we don't align all of the players at the table, and that includes the state and federal government, we're just going to be, swimming upstream on this issue. We're going to do everything we can, and my concern here is these issues between local and state have not been aligned for the last 30 years. We are finally making progress on this issue at the local level because we are all in on the concerns of generational poverty and making sure that we're addressing these three big things. As we shift to new administrations, there's a real temptation to say, well, we're not where we are. We have not made progress, and I'm the first one to say that. Our poverty numbers are still tremendously high and unacceptable. But if you look at what's happening under the hood, things are beginning to move in the right direction. Now would be a terrible time to change direction in terms of how we're addressing housing affordability, how we're investing in cradle to career, how we're addressing public transportation. If your takeaway from the last 4 years of effort is we haven't gone anywhere, we should do something different, I think we are missing the boat. It should be motivation for us to make sure that our state leaders are reflecting the leadership that's happening here in San Antonio.
Okay. One of my last couple of questions, I know we're kind of running short on time here, but what aspect of San Antonio's housing landscape keeps you up at night? Or, put more optimistically, what aspect are you most hungry to solve? This is a question for all of you.
That's a hard question. I'm mindful of my predecessor from a few decades ago, who his name was Henry B. Gonzalez, who had my role back in the 40s and 50s, I guess. He said something really interesting at the time, and I think it's still relevant today, is that as we continue to have poverty in our city, it threatens the well-being and health of all of San Antonio. And as we sit here today, a few miles down the street, we have our fellow citizens living in FDR-era cement boxes, essentially. We've allowed this as a community. And so I think that keeps me up at night. How have we allowed our fellow neighbors to live in cinder blocks down the street, and they continue, and every time there's an attempt to make a change, let's keep it the way it is. That's unacceptable. I think we sometimes care more about buildings than the people living in them, and that keeps me up at night, because I think, and I speak, back to storytelling, a mother who was 4th generation living in Alazan, who, spent the time to get financial literacy classes to learn how to, get a better life for her kids as a single mom of 5 kids. And I was, the 4th generation, I guess she was 3rd, I was 4th generation being born there, and took the courage to find a realtor and find a house and break that cycle. It always takes that one person. And I always wonder, I think what keeps me up at night is who is that one person, what is that one policy, what is that one initiative that's going to lead us forward. And I'm reminded about this organization that I have been born into now, and I get to lead it, which is beyond humbling. But what keeps me up at night is half of our families are children. Imagine if we looked at that narrative, talked about reframing housing, Opportunity Home as a children's organization. Maybe we process that voucher faster. Maybe we build that affordable housing unit faster, right? Because there's lots of kids out there who are depending on us to make good decisions. And so there's a lot that keeps me up at night.
Anyone else to add?
That one? Yeah, naturally occurring affordable housing. Again, the economic models, and I'm sorry, the academic stuff comes out, but housing has traditionally, aged and passed on from generation to generation, and new families move in. But because we've allowed a lot of our housing, and this was a product of the redlining eras when, this wasn't a choice that we made, but a choice that the banks made and larger institutions. We've stopped that process, and we don't have some of what we call the naturally occurring, the starter homes. Right? We don't have those that other cities have because they've deteriorated so much. And yet that, in so many cities, is the source of first homes and how a young family will get into the market. And so just some really creative thinking about that. Yes, there's bond money for that, but again, it's going to have to be bigger. And I don't mean just the money, but maybe the programs and to incorporate workforce and all of those kind of things. Not just new development, but thinking about that.
Nikki, what keeps you up at night? what are you, or what are you most excited about being able to address in your role?
All of it keeps me up at night. So I'm gonna share with y'all briefly storytelling. One of my favorite verses in the Bible is Habakkuk 2:2, where it talks about writing a vision and making it plain on tablets, so those who read it can run with it. Well, people share their vision with me several times a week. When they text me and email me or they call me and they say, I want to not be homeless, I can't pay my rent, I don't know what to do, I've called every agency that I can think of, and I'm going to be in my car, I'm going to be at Sam's Ministries. They say that I want to be able to pay for my son's sporting for this season, but I can afford to because they just want to go on my rent. I get those visions from people all the time. People have basic visions in the city. They want to stay housed, and they want to provide for the children. And they want to choose between this life-changing event or that one, or do I pay my rent? So when I read those, now I'm running. I'm texting everyone that I know that has property asking, do you have any availability? I'm sending them all the resources that I can think of because I want to meet their vision. I don't want you homeless either. Just last night, sorry Kirsten, I'm coming under the bus, I get a message from someone, I think it was maybe 9-something, I don't even know what time, and I'm asking her, do you have availability? Because someone is messaging me saying, this is where I am, and if I don't figure out something, because I cannot afford this rent anymore, I only get this much a month, what can I do? People have very basic visions. Very basic. And I run with that every single time I get those messages. That's why I sit on so many subcommittees. That's why I'm in so many work groups. That's why I'm grateful that you gave me the opportunity to serve as a housing commissioner. So this keeps me up all the time. It makes me cry a lot. It really does. It keeps me in prayer a lot. And I fight and I'm there and I'm working because I want to meet these people's visions. Basic visions.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to add an extra part to your answer. I think it's pretty obvious that stopping generational poverty has been a major priority of yours through housing, workforce development, all those. Why has that been your focus while on council? And do you think those various initiatives, especially housing, will depend on your success?
100% it will.
Yeah.
All of these things will depend on continued commitment, and that's actually what keeps me up at night. I'll get to that in a second. I didn't come into office saying I wanted to solve generational poverty, but it became plainly evident to me that that was the issue. That was the issue, regardless of any of the other things that we were talking about. The headwaters of the challenges that we were dealing with, one way or another, went back to poverty. And so, how can I best use my time? I wasn't planning to do this with my life. I may have said that a few times. But how can I use my time to make the biggest impact? You know, when I was first campaigning for city council, I ran into Dr. Drennan, who was, teaching an urban studies class, which she does at Trinity, and offered to have me come in and talk to the students about the campaign. And we came up with a study to look at geomapping of investments. And I was interested, how do the investments that we're making in the city correlate to areas of poverty? And what kind of statements could we make from that? We did that again when I was running for mayor. And then I invited her in before our first budget meeting to talk about the history of redlining. Over those successive meetings with Dr. Drennan, talking to our students, it had become, again, evident to me that the foundational issue that we needed to address in this community was this lack of economic stability that so many families were facing. If we can't solve that issue, we may be able to put some band-aids and build some nice things, but we're always going to find ourselves back in the same spot. So what keeps me up at night is that I'm sincere when I say, the folks that are up here are amazing. We don't agree on everything. The people around the tables are amazing. The efforts that we're making, and I get to go to a few cities now, the efforts that we're making to address these really fundamental issues are not too much different than there are in the other cities. What's unique and special about San Antonio is somehow, and this is kind of San Antonio's secret sauce, is that we've gotten all these diverse voices together at the table to create a collective roadmap and a vision and strategy of how we get to the next step. What keeps me up at night is that this is all going to be successive. There's not one vote we can take to address the climate challenge. There's not one vote we can take to finally put an end to the housing affordability issue. There's not one more vote that we can take to finally build mass transit. It's going to be leadership decisions after decisions after decisions for 10, 20, 30 years from now. My concern is that the political dynamic in this country is so screwed up and divisive, and people are retreating to their own corners, and they're saying, if it's not my way, I'm not going to contribute. So I am concerned here in San Antonio that we will lose our way, that we will forget that what has really made all this action happen is not because I agree with Councilmember Castillo on everything, but she has been laser focused on this housing affordability issue, and the areas that we can find significant common ground have moved us forward tremendously. That we all continue to stay focused on keeping everybody at the table to create these solutions, and that we hold ourselves accountable to continue to move the ball forward down the road. And I know, and I'm going too long, but this is as far as I'm going to go on the future mayor's race. There's going to be a temptation in this community to say that, you know what, I've got a new plan and a new vision, and this is where we need to go as a city. The community has already directed us where we need to go. What I want to see as these campaigns continue to unfold is tell me how you're going to take where we're going and accelerate that momentum. Keep us moving so we can continue to decrease poverty in the city. We can continue to build on mass transit gains, the housing affordability gains, that all the other cities in the country are saying, we need to do it like San Antonio. That's what I'm hoping to see. And I'll stay up at night hoping that that's the path that we continue to follow as a city.
And I have 1,000 more questions I could probably ask, but very, very quickly, if you want anyone, what would you like folks to take away with them from this conversation? What's something that they could do? One thing that they take away, or something that they can do after today to improve housing affordability in San Antonio?
Oh man, contact your policymakers in Washington and in Austin. We need our fair share of funding here. I think there's great opportunities here. There's great things that cities around the country are doing. They're doing 3D printing to increase housing stock. They're looking at modular, Lego-like buildings to increase supply. They're breaking down barriers with rezoning everywhere from Minneapolis to Oregon. There's a lot of things here to do. Contact the policymakers to help us make it happen.
I said one, I'm just kidding.
I have to read the ship, absorb it, and then vote where you hear it from your policymakers' platforms.
This isn't going to answer the question, but
Perfect.
tomorrow morning, like make a list, and every time your life touches somebody else's life, or when they are doing something to take care of one of your needs, moving your body, heating your body, taking care of your body, feeding your body, write it down. And then at the end of the day, reflect on how dependent we are on one another, and just start to we all need to start paying attention to that, and realizing that if one of us is threatened, then we all are.
Ditto, ditto, ditto. It's gonna be more than one, but I'll make it brief. Please educate yourself and vote. Get to know your neighbors and find out maybe there's something that you can do to help. You never know what's going on behind someone's door on your street. Educate yourself on this affordable housing thing. If you don't already work in the arena, educate yourself on it. And lastly, volunteer. There are so many events always going on. When you volunteer, you'd be amazed who you meet. You'd be amazed at the stories that you would hear firsthand. You'd be amazed at how your life would change. You'd be so much more enriched because you got out of your comfort zone and you volunteered to help someone else.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. I appreciate it.
All right, thank you so much. My name is Lee Munsell. I'm the editor-in-chief of the San Antonio Report. Civic engagement happens in rooms like this, with panelists like this, with moderators like this, with partners like the H.E. Buck Foundation and the rest of our sponsors. So thank everyone for all of their effort here tonight for this great event. And at the end of the day, it also depends on people like you, this room. Thank you all for being here. I know we took a little bit more of your time than we expected, but we're so grateful that you stuck it out with us. If you could consider on this election year signing up for the newsletters of the San Antonio Report. There were some lovely shout outs for Iris's reporting from the stage. We do this work all day, every day. Please sign up to be a member. I also would like to thank one of our board members, Jamie Barrera, our publisher, Angie Mogg. Thank you all for being here and for your efforts. And please have a great night. Sign up for your newsletters. Thanks.